Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Andrew DiCecco's in for Mosher today. He's been at camp every day. We'll get his observations. Eagles D, how are they looking at the padded practices against the offense? We'll get camp observations from Andrew. He's been there since the beginning. Who's winning what battles? That's all still to come here on Football at 4 today on the Sports Bash. Phils lose today 6-5 to the Yanks. That ends that series, and now they'll head out west for a long trip on the West Coast against Seattle, L.A., and Arizona. Football at 4 with DiCecco. We're going to take a look at a couple of different things. One, his camp observations. I want to get his thoughts on Quinyon Mitchell and where he fits in, how he fits in, because the other day we heard from Vic Fangio, who said something interesting regarding Quinyon Mitchell and how they're going to use him and what they plan on doing with him. And he said, look, we're going to move him all over the field. We're going to put him all over the place, and, you know, he's really handling it well. Is that a good thing for Quinyon Mitchell? Would you rather just kind of see him, you know, lock into one position, and that's his guy, and he's the one that plays opposite of Darius Slay? Is that what it's going to look like? We've also got, you know, the safety spot. It looks like when you take a look at safety, and I'm going to get Andrew's take on this, where is the battle at safety? Is there a battle? Or is this Reed Blankenship and C.J. Gardner-Johnson, and that's really it? Because Sidney Brown hasn't really been a part of it yet. And then really after that, you got James Bradbury and, you know, John McMullen on the other day talked about how Avonte Maddox is kind of in the mix at that safety spot too, in terms of second-team reps. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of questions at the safety spot. I also want to get Andrew's take on Nolan Smith. You know, a lot of people talking about Nolan Smith and what he might bring to this team. We'll get all his camp observations with Andrew DiCecco from InsideTheBirds.com, and, of course, here on Football at 4 on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. We got a bunch of stuff to get into, so let's start it now. And, by the way, yesterday during Football at 4, Adam Kaplan told us that Nate Gates was brought in, and he is now a member of the Eagles. That's another veteran offensive line. So let's start with that offensive line. A lot of injuries there, and see what Andrew has seen through his observations at Eagles camp as he joins us now for Football at 4 on the Sports Bash. AD, what's up, my man? How are you?
Hey, Mike. How's it going?
All is well, my man. And, of course, we know, Eagles, you have been down there. You've got a lot of observations of what these battles look like at training camp. So let's dive into first that offensive line where we see a lot of injuries. The center spot we know is going to have a new look this year. But what do you see from that right guard spot and how it's kind of materializing right now?
Well, for me, Mike, I believe that Mekhi Becton is the more talented player. And, yes, I know it's a very small sample size given that Tyler Steen hasn't really been given a significant opportunity to win that job. But Mekhi Becton is just so powerful and so athletic. And I think pairing him next to a center like Cam Jurgens is a little bit more on the undersized side. It gives you some power. And putting him next to Lane Johnson, you have a wall on the right side. You already have Jordan Mailata and Landon Dickerson. That gives you a wall on the left side. I think if your goal is to get the best five on the field, that would have to be it. I think it would have to include Mekhi Becton. And right now, he's looked pretty natural transitioning from tackle to guard. Tyler Steen, unfortunately, it's undetermined how long he's going to be sidelined for, but I think it could be some tough ground to make up if Mekhi Becton continues to perform.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that from you because I kind of feel the same. Like, if you could get him in that spot and he can, like, walk and chew gum, it's almost like, how do you get him off the field there? What do you make of the move to bring in Gates? They brought in Hennessy and a couple of other veterans this offseason. What is the messaging there with those guys to say, hey, we're not giving you the look there, we're giving Becton?
Well, to bring in someone like Nick Gates, who can play every position on the offensive line, has played every position on the offensive line except left tackle, tells you that you're getting a veteran player with some versatility and some depth. The Eagles haven't shied away from adding veteran players to see what they have and supplement the depth on the offensive line. You look at Max Sharping, you have Matt Hennessy, Fred Johnson, obviously has been around, but he's played some games as well. So it's interesting to see them look that way, but they are a little bit light in numbers. We mentioned Steen, Trevor Keegan, the rookie, fifth round pick. had a shoulder injury or that he was sort of dealing with. He played yesterday because Landon Dickerson left practice, and then he came back out, but he was standing there on the sideline, so Keegan went in there and played left guard. So they're a little bit banged up there, so you bring in a veteran. To me, it was a little surprising to see Mario Goodrich get waived when he went from he's the guy who made the 53-man roster last year, and he goes from making the 53 in less than a year to being on the bottom of the totem pole of a crowded defensive back room.
Andrew DiCecco, Football at 4, breaking it down for us. So that was the move yesterday on the offensive line. I want to get your take on one of the things we were discussing yesterday. You know, Andrew, Nick Sirianni mentioned where Jalen Hurts is, and he's commanding this offense. And one of the things that he said that kind of stood out a little bit was, he's commanding the offense, the deep ball, the intermediate, the short passes. And he said one of the things I really like is if there's a little bit of pressure, he slides his feet and he hits Saquon on the check down or Kenny Gainwell. Do we anticipate the running back tight ends are a much bigger part of this offense than the previous 3 years?
If what we've seen or what I've seen through training camp is any indication, I think that everyone can expect to see a more significant approach to making sure that you're working in the tight end and the running back into the passing game. Obviously, it's always going to run through A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Dallas Goedert. Saquon Barkley certainly is not going to be ignored either. But I think you're also going to see Kenny Gainwell. You're going to see Will Shipley, the rookie fourth-round pick out of Clemson, get involved as well. He's looked really good catching the football, really fluid and natural, explosive in the open field, turning upfield when he gets the ball. And Kenny Gainwell is criminally undervalued in this city for whatever reason, but he's a very dependable player. He's good in pass protection. He's not flashy. He's not explosive, but he catches the ball extremely well. And he's a player that the Eagles really trust situationally, particularly in the 2- and 4-minute offense. So he's going to be a part of it as well. And I think you're going to see the tight ends and the running backs have a significant role in this offense.
Well, that's interesting you say that because Gainwell was a wide receiver at times in Memphis. And, a lot of people thought he was going to come in here and be a big part of the passing game. That hasn't materialized as much, in part because they don't throw the ball to the running backs all that much.
Right. And he has that area of his game. And, you can make the argument that he's the Eagles' most natural pass catcher of the running backs that they have. Being a former wide receiver, being somebody who it's easy to kind of dismiss that because he really hasn't gotten the opportunity to showcase that. But he's a really, really good pass catcher. And I think you're going to see that in this offense. I think he's really going to be able to shine. And let's not forget, he's entering a contract year himself. So I think he's going to go into the season with a chip on his shoulder and has something to prove.
Andrew, the third wide receiver spot. Everybody seems to think Paris Campbell. I know you talked a lot about the receivers coming in from the draft class. There's some young guys here. Is there any competition, or is this Paris Campbell number one? And number two, what kind of role does the third wide receiver have in this offense?
Okay, so Paris Campbell, Mike, is in the lead right now. I thought that he really showed well in establishing a rapport with Jalen Hurts in the spring, which has carried over into training camp, which is notable because Jalen typically doesn't establish that type of chemistry right away with new weapons. But I'll also say that John Ross has gotten some reps with the first team as the third receiver, and Britton Covey has looked really good as a route runner, creating separation on a regular basis, and just finding ways to find the soft spot in the zone. And his short area quickness really shines when he's operating in the short to intermediate levels of the field. So I wouldn't discredit any of those three right now. And it's so easy to say, well, the Eagles should look outside the organization because none of these players move the needle. Well, in an offense you and I just ran through the gamut of players that they have. How much yardage and catches, realistically, are you expecting the number three receiver to have in this offense?
Right.
Yes, Kellen Moore runs a lot of 11 personnel, but I think any of these receivers are capable, especially Paris Campbell, of getting you 350 yards or 400 yards. I don't know that you wouldn't go outside the organization to acquire a player to do that when you already have a couple of options who I believe can.
Andrew, it's something, we talked about earlier before you came on. It's almost like do something that Quez Watkins wasn't able to do. Be consistent. Whenever you're called on, just make the play. And that was Quez's problem. Like, whenever they called on him, he had the drops, big drops and big moments. He flashed the speed, but there was so much inconsistency. It sounds like, hey, you're going to get the scraps, but when you get the scraps, you better pick them up. Otherwise, you're going to be hungry.
That's exactly right. And I think right now what you're seeing, I don't know if you got a chance to hear Paris Campbell, but I was there on Saturday when he spoke, and This is a player who's not taking this opportunity for granted. He was inactive the last 5 weeks of the season, and with the Giants, it didn't go according to plan. He bet on himself, and he didn't win. He didn't even know whether or not there was going to be a team interested in him. He thought that there was a possibility that his football career could be in peril, and he got into emotional eating, which he mentioned. I asked him that question, has your training regimen changed? And he said, yeah, in terms of diet, and he explained that he went into a rut, and he had to go back into training and 3 times a week or 3 times a day, and he was doing boxing and all these different things to put himself in position to really get back on his feet and make some headway back in the NFL. And then John Ross is somebody who's a reclamation project. He's on his last opportunity by all accounts, so he's not taking this for granted. And then Britton Covey has an opportunity here to really become something more than a punt returner, which he's always had that ability. Last summer he had the hamstring injury, and you saw towards the end of last season what he's able to do sporadically if you get the ball in his hands. He offers a different skill set than anybody there. So all 3 of those players have a chip on the shoulder and something to prove, which is a good thing when you're looking at it in terms of competition.
All right, Andrew DiCecco, Football at 4. Check out all his observations on training camp. A lot of camp coverage over at InsideTheBirds.com. We mentioned Gainwell a little bit. What about Will Shipley? Does he have a role, or is he just kind of the young guy, following everybody's lead, and a lot of the touches are going to go to Barkley? Any other touches go to Gainwell, or do we like what we see from Shipley?
I really like what I see from Will Shipley. In fact, on that same Saturday practice, Will Shipley was my offensive player of the day, and Nolan Smith was my defensive player of the day. Will Shipley is somebody who, in minicamp and OTAs, he seemed to be fighting the football a little bit. Maybe he was pressing, but whatever the case is, he turned the corner, and he is extremely natural catching the football. He ran that wheel route. And he beat Julian Okwara down the left sideline. Jalen hit him on a perfectly placed pass down the field, and I think that really speaks to what he can provide in terms of positional alignment and receiving ability. And he also, at 200 pounds, he's 5'11". He can also give you he has some juice, and he can give you some pop up the middle as a runner too. I've seen a lot more development from him early than I really anticipated. So I really like what I've seen from him so far.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy to see how he factors in as well. Grant Calcaterra's name keeps popping up. What are you seeing there?
Grant Calcaterra is someone who is a little bit polarizing because he's been around for a couple of seasons. He's had opportunities to step in place of Dallas Goedert, but for whatever reason, whether the team didn't have a lot of confidence in him or whether they just wrote the tight end out of the game script for those 3 weeks last season. Calcaterra, I don't believe he got any targets in those 3 weeks, and one of the weeks he was inactive. So for whatever reason, they just haven't leaned on him in those times. But now it seems to be that he's turned a corner, really good catching the football, creating separation at the top of routes, soft hands. He just seems like a lot of the quarterbacks seem to really trust in him, and they know where he's going to be. The timing's really good. So we'll have to see. Look, the pads were on yesterday for the first time. He's not an overly physical player by nature. He's more of a pass catcher. He has to work on his blocking. So we'll have to see how he is when when he's taking some hits and guys are contesting some of those catches. We'll have to see how that goes. But I think right now he's the clear 2. Kellen Moore said that on Saturday when I asked him that, and that's the way that's going right now. I think C.J. Uzomah was penciled in to be that too, but he's been a disappointment through 5 practices.
All right, Football at 4, Andrew DiCecco. We're looking through some observations for the first week. I like the, I think you put it in your story too, that Nakobe Dean said, hey, the shorts are cute. Let's get the pads on. They put the pads on yesterday and how that kind of changes some things. So let's go to the defensive guys with the pads on. Let's start in that secondary. You, me, a lot of people. We're all interested to see how is this thing shaping up. There was about 9 names that we were intrigued by. Well, where does that stand now?
In terms of defense?
Yeah, in the corner. Sorry, at corner.
Gotcha. So, to me, I think Isaiah Rodgers has been really impressive. And, there was this assumption that he was going to be able to hit the ground running, but until you see it on the field, it's kind of tough to make that, to kind of take that at face value. But I'll tell you what, it doesn't look like he's missed a beat. He gets his hands on a lot of footballs, and his closing speed, his recovery speed, and his instincts really stick out to me. Now, if you're kind of gauging it in competition, he got 2 days with the ones right off the bat, and Keely Ringo got 3 days with the ones right off the bat. They have been rotating throughout practices, but I always kind of take notes of who's, and Zach Bond at linebacker has been with alongside Devin White every single day. But I think Isaiah Rodgers has shown well. Keely Ringo's had some moments, but I think Isaiah has performed better. Quinyon Mitchell, to me, has been the star. Yesterday, a couple of really strong reps against A.J. Brown after the one play where the defense forced Jalen Hurts to hold the ball in a red zone drill. Jalen wanted to go to A.J. He couldn't because Quinyon had him blanketed, and Quinyon whips around and gives him a glare, and almost as if to say, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not backing down. So I thought that for a rookie to have that kind of moxie and that kind of poise is really encouraging.
Yeah, and I want to get your take on what Vic Fangio, on kind of how he described how he planned on using Quinyon Mitchell. You know, as he said so far, he's been all over the place. Is that how they plan on using him, or do you think he will be locked in at one, at the outside corner across from Slay?
So, plans change, right? And Cooper DeJean, you and I have talked about this. I've written about this. Before he suffered the hamstring injury and was forced to miss, I guess, another couple of weeks now, I penciled him in to be the starting nickel corner when the Eagles play the Packers in Brazil. But with so much ground to make up, you almost have to count him out of that equation. And I think if you're the Eagles, and I'm trying to rationalize how they're thinking, you want to find a way to get your first-round pick on the field as quickly as you can. And with the mixing and matching, you really see where players are comfortable, what their strengths are, and what they can maybe even improve on when they have adequate time to learn. And I think Quinyon has really taken to that role. He's tough. He's physical. He processes things really well. So that really speaks to his football acumen, and they've thrown a lot at him, and he's responded really well. So I think he will be the nickel when come week one.
That'll be interesting to kind of keep our eyes on that. Those two rookies, as you mentioned, Cooper not out there. He's almost out of sight, out of mind. But don't forget, Cooper DeJean, we'll see what ends up happening there. Give me your assertion, if you will, on the James Bradbury, his chances of sticking with this team and at safety.
Well, right now he's on the team, and he kept saying right now. He said that at least 4 or 5 different times during his availability, and he's not a player that has any ego, at least nothing that I've seen in the 2 years that I've been around him, 2+. So moving him from corner, which is obviously a more marquee position, to safety, there's no ego there. He's trying to take on this challenge, and he even said that he went to the coaches and made that suggestion because he said, I didn't play very well. He was very candid in his availability. So I think he's taken to the position pretty well so far. The question I have is, how is he going to be able to play when he has to come downhill? How is he going to be able to make tackles when you have a running back coming at you in the open field, which tackling's not really his forte. He can do it. He said he can play physical. It just didn't show last season. So that, to me, is going to be the big key here, because I'm not exactly sure how his skill set translates to safety. Oh, and by the way, if you are the third safety, you're going to have to play special teams. That's a prerequisite, and he really hasn't done an awful lot of it. So that's where my big question is.
Andrew, big role? What kind of role for Nolan Smith? We hear a lot about him. He's been kind of the one guy. It's like, bigger things from him this year. Do you see it?
I do. Nolan Smith gained 7 pounds. He looks a lot stronger than he did last year. He's playing with a lot more confidence. His hand usage is advanced, and he's explosive. And you're really seeing that. He has a unique set of skills that are unlike any of the other players that the Eagles have at the edge position. Now, you need to see him be able to translate that from the practice field onto the game field. I understand that, but everything that I've seen through 5 practices tells me he's further ahead than he was last year. He's playing with more confidence. He's winning with more regularity, with different pass rush moves, hand usage, and he's playing a lot more physical. So what that means for the season and his projection, well, we're going to find out. But I think he's going to have a pretty big role, and I maintain that he's going to be one of the breakout players on defense.
All right, that's a big one there. What do you see at linebacker here? I know you like Ben Van Sumeren. Everybody just assumes it's White and Deans. Haven't heard a lot about what's going on at that spot.
Zach Bond has gotten most of the run with the first team opposite Devin White. The Kobe's flashed and he's had his moments. I think yesterday he got he proved to be a little vulnerable in coverage. particularly trying to guard Kenny Gainwell on the flat routes. But Nakobe hasn't played a lot of football, especially within the past year. So, what I have seen from him is flowing the football with urgency. He's showing no ill effects of the foot injuries of last season. He's moving around pretty well. He looks a lot stronger, Mike, and a lot bigger than he did last season, for what it's worth. So I think ultimately when the dust settles, it will be Nakobe that unseats Zach Bond. I know the Eagles really like Zach Bond, but I think Nakobe just gives you more in terms of football IQ. He's more of a cerebral player. He's played the position an awful lot more in his career than Zach Bond has. And then you look further down, Oren Burks was the player that a lot of folks had just penciled in. Well, he got nicked up early in the first practice and hasn't practiced since. And during that time, I've been impressed with Van Sumeren, and they've been shuffling him out mostly with the second team with Nakobe, but he's also seen a handful of first-team reps as well. And just really quick twitch athlete, plays the game with ferocity. You can see him closing on ball carriers quickly, and he's somebody that I'm going to be sort of keeping my eye on as the intensity ratchets up here.
Well, it will be interesting to see that linebacker position. They got a couple more weeks to settle it all out. And, of course, Friday night, next Friday, the Eagles are in Baltimore to take on the Ravens. And you'll hear that game right here on 97.3 ESPN. Andrew DiCecco covering it all for InsideTheBirds.com and here on Football at 4. He's back tomorrow. Our division previews will continue with really maybe the most interesting division of all, the NFC North. Bears, Detroit, Green Bay, and Minnesota. All those four teams have an interesting story. We'll tell it tomorrow with Andrew. Andrew, take care, buddy.
Talk soon.
All right, he'll back tomorrow, Andrew DiCecco.